Hey, FlimsyLunchTray here, and welcome to World of Warships for our Saturday upgrade and commander build video on the Tier 10 Japanese torpedo destroyer, the Shimakaze. Feel free to use the chapters below to skip to whatever is perhaps most relevant for you. So with the Shimakaze, I'm going to go over the commander, upgrades, suggested build types, combat signals, and talk about just some things in general with the ship. But as traditional, when we start off this, the first thing we cover is what type of destroyer is the Shimakaze. I mean, it's one of the most popular destroyers in the game, and she's just straight up a torpedo destroyer, particularly due to her three, was it quintuple? I get confused sometimes in my head. 3 sets of 5 torpedoes, so she gets 15 torpedoes, and depending on which torpedoes you take, they hit really hard. I mean, generally speaking, they all hit hard, but some hit a little bit harder than the other 2 different types or 3 different type totals of various torpedoes that you can take. She has guns. She's got the 127. She's got 6, but it's a 5.7 second reload time without adrenaline rush or like building into main battery mod 3, so on and so forth. And then her armor scheme is pretty traditional. There's nothing crazy happening here. You know, there's no 25 millimeter thick plating on the side plating, so just 19 and 13. So the playstyle of Shimakaze is that, yes, she's a torpedo destroyer, and she really doesn't want to take gun engagements unless she has to. The good thing about these Japanese 127 high explosive shells is they do hit decently hard if you find yourself in an engagement with another enemy destroyer. So let's first talk about the modules. So as I just stated, these are 127 millimeter guns. They have a 5.7 second reload time without building into them. You know, you really shouldn't build into the guns. Like, just go play Harugumo, right? Play the gunboat DD Japanese line. They do have a hefty 180 degree turn time of 22.8 seconds. Possible to get that down with the commander grease the gears. I'll talk about that. Your high explosive shell damage hits for 2,150. AP shell damage is 2,200. With the hull, we have, I think, stock your 17,900. I'm running a seasoned commander that has an enhanced survivability expert, so we're getting several hundred more hit points on our with Shimakaze with our commander, and we can go up even further and running the Charlie Kilo here, which gives us a plus 5% on the ship HP. And you see that bumps us up to 23,000. If you're looking like in the ship builder, it says like 22,995 or whatever, but it's 23,000 hit points here. So I quite like building into survivability Shimakaze. I'll talk about that more with the commander build, because I know some people don't like to build into survivability at all with Shima. And then you have 3 different options of torps. So you start with what are commonly known as the noob tubes. So the reason they're called noob tubes is that, 1, they have a 20-kilometer range, and secondly, they have a 2.5 kilometer detectability range. So generally speaking, a player can have like 15 to 16 second reaction time. So, you know, I did this once with 2 other clanmates, and we did a triple Shimakaze noob tube division. It was hysterical. And we got ocean, so we were causing so much chaos for the battleships when you're putting 15, or no, not just 15, but 45 20-kilometer torpedoes into enemy spawn. So, you know, that map's not very common to get. But with the torpedo build we have right now, between our fill the tubes and then 6 slot, you can see this would have 114.8 second reload time. The damage of these, almost 21,000, 65 knots. And then the ones I like to run are the 12-kilometer torpedoes. So these have 117 second reload time, 12-kilometer range, and these hit the hardest of all 3. So these hit for 23,767. And again, with our build, with making torpedoes a bit faster, 70 knots, and a detectability range of 1.7 kilometers. So these are these torpedoes have the lowest detectability range and almost the best reaction time. I think it's like 9.45, something like that, around 9 seconds. But these have an even lower reaction time. Yes, the detectability range is 1.8 on these 8-kilometer torpedoes, but they go 80 knots when you build into torpedo speed. But they only hit for 21,367 damage. So these maybe you'd run more in like operations unless you're getting like Ultimate Frontier where there's a lot of American radar. I typically just run the 12 kilometer regardless of game mode because these hit the hardest, but these are really good as an example for like convoy when you're in choke points and make it really impossible for enemy ships to avoid them because of how fast the torpedoes are. So that's that. For the gunfire control system, our main battery firing range is 11.4 kilometers. So again, you're not a gunboat. You don't want to build into the range on these guns. Your propulsion without engine boost, without Ceramic combat signal is 39 knots. I do recommend taking Ceramic in like randoms, ranked clan battles. If you're playing Shimakaze, that gets you up to 41 knots. And then with the engine boost, which is a plus 8%, I think that begins to push you up to like, what is it, like 44, 43, 44, 45, maybe something like that. And then you can even get this ship faster with Brisk. Probably when I talk about Brisk, I'll put it in the screen of how fast you would go ultimately if you have all these things going for you. And that takes us into the upgrades. So for the first slot, I've taken the main armaments mod 1. This is pretty much mandatory on Shimakaze because it reduces the risk of your main battery and torpedo tubes becoming incapacitated by negative 20%. Your main battery torpedo tube survivability plus 50%. And your main battery repair time and torpedo tube repair time is negative 20%. So we want to do, really this is mainly for the torps. We want to keep our torpedoes functioning. And if they do get incapacitated and our damage control party's on reloading, then, you know, that torpedo tube repair time of negative 20% is quite helpful. Second slot, we've taken the engine room protection. Very feasible to take the engine boost mod 1. Sorry, something stuck in my throat. But let's say you don't have the coal to invest in that. Then what you have is the engine room protection, which reduces the risk of your engine and steering gears becoming incapacitated by negative 20%. And engine repair time and steering gears repair time, if either should be knocked out, is reduced by 20% to get them back online. Yeah, clear the throat there. So then the engine boost mod 1. This is a special upgrade you can get in the armory. It gives a plus 30% action time on your engine boost. So right now you see it's 120 seconds, and if I remember the math right in my head, I think that just jumps you up to like 150 seconds. If we click on this, I will pull it up for you. And it is for 17,000 coal. You get a coupon that once a month that is 25% off, so then it's like 12,750 coal. I would recommend picking this special upgrade up. I'm starting to stockpile coal now, so I am going to wait until that comes off of cooldown in 3 days, even though I have plenty of coal. Because there's just a lot of benefit in having this to get around the map much more quicker and for a longer duration, you know, having like 2.5 minutes of action time. On the flip side, if you get caught out, you know, the engine room protection is certainly helpful. You saw yesterday I got smoked a little bit in the Friday highlight where I got a little too close with the Hoffman, didn't give enough distance, and everything was getting broken, right? Even despite having this. So the idea is, of course, when you're playing Shimakaze, you're not getting spotted. If you're taking like a gunboat hybrid DD, then there's more value for this, certainly, as an example. But with Shimakaze, I think you can run around confidently with this. So I would pick this up. Third slot is going to be the Torpedo Tubes Mod 1. This increases your torpedo speed by plus 5%, torpedo tubes traverse speed plus 20%, risk of torpedoes becoming incapacitated negative 40%. So between this upgrade and this upgrade, effectively you're like taking negative 60%, or sorry, negative 60% off the risk of our tubes becoming incapacitated. And these two together is really important because, just to give a slight spoiler here, the Torpedo Tubes in Mod 2, risk of torpedoes becoming incapacitated is plus 50%. So between these three, you're actually only getting negative 10% risk of your torpedoes becoming incapacitated. Otherwise, there's really no need. Your AA sucks. You're not playing gunboat. You don't really need to get your turrets turning any faster because this is all about the torpedoes and you're not going to be firing your guns that much. Nor do you need the smoke generator mod 1. There are other destroyers at tier 10 that do that role better. Fourth slot is the propulsion mod 1. Time to reach full engine power when accelerating, negative 50%. I think you could see from the Friday highlight how this was really helpful. We had avoided some Jaeger torps. We avoided some Yugumo torps. Sound like something fell in the background. So this is really beneficial to be running around with. I don't really like running these others on my destroyers. I mean, this is more like a battleship skill, right? Sometimes steering gears mod 1 is beneficial and helps, but really it's the propulsion mod 1 that I think is best in my opinion. The fifth slot is the concealment system mod 1. You have among the best concealment at tier 10 with Shimakaze 5.6. There's no reason not to build into that further because that's what this line excels at. It excels at getting close. Like the clip where I showed you getting like up to 6 kilometers close up to the Montana, which we torpedoed and killed in the Friday highlight. So this just really is the best route to go. And also I just realized that every option we've taken so far is what Wargaming recommends in terms of the upgrade. The sixth slot is the torpedo tubes mod 2, which just briefly highlighted. So your torpedo tube reload time is negative 15%. Risk of torpedoes becoming incapacitated plus 50%. So that's why if you haven't mounted any upgrades that you can see our torpedo reload time is so good, in particular with these 12-kilometer torpedoes. So it's increasing your damage output in the game, which I think is really great overall. Now, we also have if you have access to Research Bureau, we have a unique upgrade. This improves the ship's tactical role by increasing the efficiency of long-range torpedo attacks. So your torpedo tube reload time is negative 25%. So rather than having the negative 15%, if you go 10% more, then you're going to get a 10% faster reload. Okay, now on the flip side, the risk of your torpedoes becoming incapacitated is the same. It's 50% here, 50% here. And then we also get this additional nerf where our torpedo tube traverse speed is negative 70%. So in looking here, our 180-degree turn time is 6 seconds. So this would mean, what would it add? I'd actually have to do the math here. I'll put it here on the screen what that ultimately would be. So it's just really a question like, is it worth it to you? Can you wait a little longer to get your torpedoes off? This also works for the Azure Lane Shimakaze in the game as well. But it's pretty hefty for 19,200 hit points. For me, I don't know if the torpedo quick reload system is really worth it on Shimakaze. Yes, it would be great to have even faster reloading torpedoes than what we already have. I imagine this would get us closer to like 105 seconds. That's just a guess off the top of my head. There are other unique upgrades I think that are probably better to go for before Shimakaze. But if you have access to Research Bureau, you have the Research Bureau points, maybe it's something worth testing out. I don't have it, so I can't honestly say and give you an honest evaluation. Maybe another content creator here on YouTube that does WoWs can give you a better answer than myself on that regard. But I wouldn't rank it very high in terms of comparing it to the other unique upgrades I think that are better to take before Shimakaze. In terms of the armament, so the high explosive shells, 127 millimeter, 5.7 seconds, 2,150 damage, 9% chance of causing fire on target. We could really bump that up if we wanted to 10% as an example. Actually, did I? Yeah, this one doesn't work because it's 160 millimeter or greater. So just 10%, excuse me. Armor penetration capacity, 21 millimeter. I think I'll try to highlight it maybe next week. I'm going to do like a Shimakaze in 2025 video. And it's hard when you have other enemy destroyers that, for example, I think Hoffman has it. Yeah, a 25 millimeter side plating belt. So either you have to shoot Hoffman's like really big nose, or you have to switch over to armor piercing to pin through that 25 millimeter thickness. So just keep that in mind. Otherwise, just be mindful of how you're placing your shells if you are running into enemy destroyers with high explosive shells. So these are pretty good. They have a decent dispersion, I think, in my opinion. And the high explosive of the Japanese line is kind of known to hit decently hard. With the AP, you can now see the shell velocity is the same. Dispersion is the same, right? So not too much more there outside of doing... why does it have the damage right there? Am I blind? The AP damage is 2,200. I feel like... Oh yeah, there it is. I'm blind. So they do almost the exact same damage. So just keep that in mind. Torpedoes, I've already talked about the 3 different ones when we went over the upgrades, but what we run is 12-kilometer torpedoes with a reload time of 117 seconds, a 12-kilometer range, 23,767 damage, 70 knots with the full build we have going on between the upgrades and the commander, and then a detectability range of 1.7, so it's around like a 9.5 second reaction time enemy players have if they're not running like a hydroacoustic search or something. Depth charges, maximum damage 4,600, number of charges 2, bombs in a charge 16, reload time 40 seconds. I actually have only had once or twice I ran into a submarine, and the one submarine I did run into, I didn't get to use depth charges on him because when he resurfaced, he had moved further away, but I did torp him. We got a torp kill on the sub. So good to have. These hit decently hard, and it's good to see how many bombs there are in a charge, so that's nice. Consumable wise, pretty standard for a destroyer, 5-second action time, 40-second cooldown time. We have 3 smoke generators and 3 engine boosts. If you want to take Superintendent, that'd give you 4 smoke screens and 4 engine boosts. I don't think it's worth it, but noting the smoke screen, it's a 0.45 kilometer action radius, action time of 20 seconds, 97-second smoke screen dispersion time, and a cooldown time of 160 seconds. So you have to wait quite a long time before your smoke comes off cooldown, so make sure you use it really wisely. Otherwise, if you get caught out in a really bad way, it will suck if you're not able to go dark with the smoke as an example. Engine boost plus 8%, action time 120 seconds. We talked about bumping that up to 150 seconds with the engine boost mod in the second slot. I think it's worth it if you decide to go for it. It has a cooldown time of 120 seconds, and again, we have 3. You can take November Foxtrot, which I do run on Shimakaze when I'm playing ranked and randoms battle, or if I was doing clan battles with Shima. So I have 14-second cooldown time, and then 152-second cooldown time, and then on your damage control party, 38 rather than 40. And then speaking of the smoke, we can increase the action time on our smoke's generator consumable action time. So we can bump it from 20 to 22. I don't really think it's that big of a deal, but hey, to each their own, as it were. Now, I think the other thing to highlight with that, I'm just double checking. No, there's nothing else to highlight. I had a brain fart there. Then I also like running Hotel Yankee. Damage caused by ramming an enemy plus 50%. Damage received when ramming an enemy, negative 20%. This is also to do with submarines. It's kind of funny when you ram a submarine with a DD, and you might kind of struggle with Shima if you don't get the depth charges off right, and you have a longer gun reload time, and let's say your torpedoes are on cooldown, reloading. So then, hey, this is fun. Or maybe if your torpedoes get busted, you can just ram that enemy destroyer, cruiser, or battleship, or aircraft carrier, as an example. Other thing to make mention here, this is the last of the combat signals I run, is the Juliet Whiskey combat signal. This is a combat signal which improves the chances of causing flooding by plus 15%. So I'm going to try to remember off the top of my head. But right now you have, I think it's a 406% chance of causing flooding with the 12 kilometer. The 20 kilometers, I think, have like it's 360, then maybe the 8s are 355, something like that. But when you mount this, the Juliet Charlie, plus 15%, I think it takes you up to a 400 and like, let's say 50-60% chance. And then you can get that up even higher with the Liquidator. And that will be plus 30% chance of causing flooding, which actually pushes you up to like, I think it's like a 600% chance of causing flooding So there's some good synchronization across these if you decide to run that and keep it in mind. So let's get right into the commander. I think we've talked enough about those things. So here you can see the season commander. I'm just going to say his name is something Suzuki. He has an enhanced skill for destroyers, which is the survivability expert, which is a plus 400% or plus 400 4 ship tier versus the standard 350, if I remember that correctly. If you're wondering where to pick him up, we come in here to the armory, and we'll come into the commanders, and we'll scroll down. And you can see he's right here. He has a twin for 35,000 coal. He himself is 1,500 doubloons. I think I'm running him on Harugumo, and I'm having to raise him up more. But the enhanced skills of survivability expert, emergency or survivability expert. Oh, those both are survivability experts, and then the emergency repair specialist. I think that's a cruiser or battleship skill. Excuse me. So we like having more hit points on our commander. As I said during the 5-day highlight yesterday, I know people's opinion will vary on that. I'll explain it once we get to this skill, but that's where you pick up this commander if you're wondering from the armory. So let me just highlight the build that I have. So honestly, I think this probably, in terms of a 10-point build, this falls within like the 95% range of destroyer players or destroyers in the game. That the 10-point build is just this route right here. Of course, it depends on survivability expert. I'll get to that in just a moment. But first is preventive maintenance. This reduces the risk of fire, risk of main turrets, sonar, torpedo tubes, steering gears, and engines becoming incapacitated. So it's a negative 30% chance, which is really helpful. So again, this running really well. Wrong key. With this skill or upgrade and this upgrade. So it complements each other really well, right? And you want to keep your torpedoes engaged and online. We don't have a secondary battery in our AA battery. It just kind of sucks in general, is what I'd say. It's okay. You'll do okay against 8s, but 10s and super CVs, like, don't bother. A three-point commander, last stand skill. Ship remains partially able to sustain speed and maneuverability with the engine and steering gears incapacitated. So in the example of yesterday's video, when I ran into the Hoffman, I had a lot of stuff get busted, right? But I was still able to move away from the Hoffman by having the last stand skill. Otherwise, if I was waiting till I get a little bit further and I broke contact with the smoke to then use my damage control party. But when your damage control party is on cooldown and you're really busted, like you're either spinning in circles or you're just dead in the water. So last stand's really valuable in my opinion. 6-point build, survivability expert. So plus 400 rather than plus 350 for each ship tier. The reason why I'm a big survivability expert believer on the Shimakaze is because I've had multiple games, not just in Shimakaze. I think I've only had like one game where this came really clutch. But I've had a lot of other games I played where not running survivability expert on my destroyer would have meant a loss rather than a victory for myself and for the team. And having more hit points to play with, especially as a shorter player towards the end of a battle, is quite helpful in my opinion. Even when I talked about that also in the part 4 of the Veteran Player Guide series, because I had a lot of hit points still by the end of the battle. And ideally, you retain most of your hit points in a Shimakaze. And I say ideally, because what do I see in World of Warships again and again and again and again and again? I see Shimakaze players who have 5.6 concealment, who get within 5 kilometers of a battleship player, completely giving away their presence and known ability. So you wouldn't need survivability expert if you were an expert at staying hidden. But I see a lot of the player base that constantly is getting too close. When there's not a hydro threat, when there's not a radar threat, when there's not a plane threat, a submarine threat, you know, all these things, right? So there's so many threats that spot you now in World of Warships compared to maybe a few years ago. And that's why I believe survivability experts are really helpful. And I've just had several clutch games where having it on my destroyer really helped. So that's my opinion. And of course, I'll talk about what does it look like if you were one of those who don't like running survivability expert. But then a 10-point build would be Concealment Expert to have the 5.6 by sea and 2.7 by air. I've had multiple times where the CV 2.9, 2.8 away, and I was like, oh, that was close. So Concealment is just really good. After this, let's say you want to follow the build route that I have. A 13-point commander, I would probably go for either Adrenaline Rush or Fill the Tubes. I quite like Adrenaline Rush, especially when you are losing hit points. Even in like an example, Operations, you can farm Adrenaline Rush a little bit. And we're getting our reload time down further from the 117 to 115, 112, 108, just as an example, depending on how many hit points you've lost. So I usually go for Adrenaline Rush as the 13-point build, but again, this isn't a gunboat destroyer, it's not a hybrid destroyer, it's full-on torpedo, and you're trying to retain your concealment, right? So then Fill the Tubes might be your 13-point option because this reduces your reload time down by negative 10%. So this would be an example of a 16-point build, and then a 20-point build would be Radio Location. So after the skills are mastered, the player will have the direction to the nearest enemy ship indicated to them. Enemy player will be alerted that a bearing was taken on their ship. So they kind of get this little icon in the center right of their screen that says you've been located, I think is how it reads. And then otherwise you kind of get this, if you watch my Friday highlight, you get this kind of red bow, this red arc. Or sorry, it'd just be gray unless you're running a mod. I run a mod that makes it red. Otherwise it's just this gray kind of arch that points to the nearest location enemy destroyer to you. And you really need that on destroyers, torpedo destroyers here in the game, in my opinion, especially on Shimakaze, because it lets you know whether you can make big plays or not, like I made on that Montana in one of the early clips, letting me know that the Hoffman was pushing the flank and I needed to kite out. It's just really valuable to know. And when it's only a 5.6 conceal, like that raises the value for you to be prepared a bit more, maybe whether it's positioning or getting your turrets turned, because you have that 22.8 second 180 turn time right now, the example of this build. So it's just really valuable. That's a 20-point build. And then probably what I would do with this build is I would go for Liquidator. So then, you know, to go from a 460% chance to 600% chance of causing flooding is pretty great. So that would be the 21-point build that I do, because this is a plus 30% chances of causing flooding. Now, there's a few things we're missing out here, right? And this is where I think survivability expert for some begins to fall off. And that's like, well, Flimsy, you're kind of missing the full torpedo build line, if you will. So, for example, we don't have Swift Fish, plus 5% for torpedo speed. So our 70 knots would turn into like, what, 73 knots as an example. I'm just guessing off the top of my head. Yeah, 73.5. And that would also lower the reaction time for enemy players to avoid the torpedoes, right? So maybe it gets you from a 9.45 to like 9-second reaction time. I don't know exactly. Maybe I can put it here on the screen. I got a lot of things to put on the screen, so I'm sorry if I spaz that. So that's actually pretty valuable, right? But that would mean like giving up a 2-point skill, so or a higher point skill. So like, would you actually give up Last Stand to take Swift Fish? Would you give up Survivability Expert to take Swift Fish? Would you give up RPF or Adrenaline Rush as an example? I mean, these two just work so well with the torpedo reload time, right? And then the other thing we miss is the Swift and Silence. This skill has a permanent effect that reduces your main battery reload time, so it's plus 5%. So if I go here, it's a 5.7, I think, for our guns. 5.7 times 1.05. Then that brings us pretty much to a 6-second reload time on Shimakaze. Again, you don't play Shimakaze for guns, so that's it's okay. But then increase your ship's speed while she remains undetected, plus 8%. So you're going even faster. So, you know, in addition to the Swift and Silence, your engine boost, Sierra Mike combat signal, I'll put it on the screen here. Your total speed ends up being pretty well, where you're definitely pushing past 45 knots, getting closer to, I don't know, I'm guessing close to 50 knots, 47, 48, 49. So then there's a lot of value in that, right? But if you wanted to take all of that, then that means, well, I'm going to have to give up, perhaps you give up Adrenaline Rush, and then you have an exact 4-point build. Or you give up Survivability Expert, right? And then you have exact 4 points remaining, and you take Swift and Silence. I see, both of these skills are really well, right? At the end of the day, this video is just me giving you my opinion and what I like and what I prefer. So this is what I have liked, what I have preferred so far. I used to have a 21-point build on Shimakaze, and I'd play a lot of Shimakaze, some in ops operations, but then also when we had grand battles and another asymmetric battles, I have a lot more experience with Shimakaze beyond the 28, 29 random battles that I have. And I really liked the flow of this build. However, there are some downfalls where I'm picking survivability over being perhaps a little bit more aggressive. If I was really going to give up Survivability Expert, I would go for Swift and Silence. Sorry, I think I referred to it as Brisk earlier. It's not the same. Just to have more speed to get around the map and make it more easier to get away when you're not spotted. But I think it's hard. It really does depend on matchmaking when you're talking about hybrids with planes, aircraft carriers at the high tiers. I mean, you're gonna run into tier 8 CVs, tier 10 CVs, super CVs. You're gonna have some Marines that outspot you when they're at periscope depth. Perhaps as an example, you're gonna have a lot of radar at tier 10, and then a lot of hydro. So that's why I think most Shimakaze players will probably benefit from running Survivability Expert on your destroyer. Otherwise, you give away a lot of your survivability to go for a full Swift and Silence build, as an example, if you went down that route. So I'd be curious to, if you have a Shimakaze, what do you have preferred running on your build? It'd be interesting to see kind of conversation we have in the comments below. Otherwise, I don't really see with the other 1 point I have remaining. You could talk about Grease the Gears just to get you down to 19.8 second, 180 return time. But as long as you have RPF, kind of giving you an idea of where the closest enemy ship is to you, then usually you can give yourself enough time and that doesn't matter. And hey, who doesn't really want to get floods on battleships, cruisers, and perhaps even destroyers, and definitely aircraft carriers, right? Or maybe an unlucky submarine that takes your torpedo. So with that being said, that's going to bring the video to a close. I hope you liked it today as we go over all of Shimakaze. I can't believe it took me so long to actually do an upgrade commander build video on Shimakaze. When I realized I didn't have an upgrade commander build video on Shimakaze, I was like, what? It's crazy. This is one of the most popular ships in the game, and I really like playing Shimakaze, and I've quite enjoyed it this last week, 2 weeks, playing it more consistently in randoms battles. So if you liked this video, give a thumbs up. If you didn't, give a thumbs down. Subscribe if you want to see more. If you're subscribed, thanks so much. I appreciate it. Thank you to my Patreon supporters. Until next time, take care.